This is a map of all the people who have been killed by gunfire just this year. 42,000 people. Today, we're going to talk about Jewish responses to gun ownership and gun violence. Hello, everybody. David Paskin here, along with my colleague and sergeant at arms and good helper and every Rabbi Litwak. How you doing, Rabbi?
I'm doing great, Rabbi David.
Good.
Nice to be with you. Really wish we weren't dealing with this topic.
Yeah, you know, I suggested that we talk about this given what just happened, but what's terrifying is that it is always just happening. It always just happened.
The act that you talked about has already been eclipsed by another.
Right. I was thinking about Oxford, and just so everyone knows, this is the website that I was showing you before. This is the gunviolencearchive.org, and you can see that just gun violence deaths is 42,000 for this year, from January 1st through December 9th of this year. And of course, some of those are homicides, murder, some of those are suicides. And I think that it's easy to think about guns only in the context of school shootings or church or synagogue shootings. But there's also the much broader discussion to be had about how should we feel and think about gun ownership and the use of force in general on others, on ourselves. So that's what we kind of wanted to dive into today is to think about what are some Jewish perspectives on gun violence. And the only thing I'll start by saying is they didn't have guns back in the time of the Talmud. So the sources that we use to inform our thinking today, we have to understand that those sources are written to reflect a time when guns themselves didn't exist, but violence certainly did exist. So I don't know, Rabbi, do you have any opening thoughts or?
Yeah, I think, so let me just quickly respond to say, you're right. We're going to be looking at sources and reflecting on things that we can both look to because weapons are weapons, and then we can't necessarily look at them in the same way because the capacity that we had to kill using something with a blade is markedly different than an AR-15 or whatever submachine gun multi-capacity firearm that we have today, and whether that should play into our conversation. Where I really want to start is that we should have a discussion, or we should start with what are some of the values if we were going to create a Jewish response to gun ownership and gun usage. What are the values that we're going to inform that? And here's where it becomes a bit challenging, because I could name off the idea of shalom, of peace, do not murder, one of the big 10, pikuach nefesh, saving a life. But I could also talk about self-defense and safety, and that those values may end up being conflicting. Okay? That the idea of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, okay, that it's possible that causing the loss of a life and saving a life, okay, could come into conflict with each other. Right?
Are you saying causing? Are you talking about causing another person's death to save my own life? Is that what what you're thinking
or to
about?
save someone else's life.
Or to save someone else's life. Okay.
Right. I
Right.
mean, saving my own life, that there's a whole thing around that we may or may not get into, um, but the idea of defense and murder being all in the same act, and what does that, how do we deal with that when it comes
Right.
to gun?
So,
gun
by the way, we should probably clarify a couple of terms, because murder and kill in Hebrew are not the same. They are very. The Torah never says thou shalt not kill. It says thou shalt not murder. Lo tirtzach as opposed to lo tinhag, and so they're very different ideas. And so you were just referencing. I mean, here's just one text, which is someone breaks into your house. What do? Are you allowed to to protect yourself? And according to this, the thinking is, yeah, you are allowed to, if they rise up, to kill them.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong
and
with that.
That's even based earlier in a text from Exodus, where if there's a thief that is seized when tunneling into your home, and then beaten to death, because there's a presumption that that thief may come to harm you. All right, there's no blood guilt on that person. Self-defense is a value, because life is a value, right? And so,
and in fact, in that recent case, in the Oxford case, the I think, I didn't follow it that closely, but I think one of the main defenses was he was protecting himself. He shot those people because he felt threatened by them. And that raises a whole other issue of how does one, and it's interesting that the Shemot text, the Exodus text that you just referenced, and this Sanhedrin text that I just pulled up, they both talk about the intentions of the person who's potentially doing harm. How do I know the intentions of the other person? How do I know that they're going to cause me harm, and that I have to use violence or force to stop them? This is, I think, a challenge that police officers struggle with constantly, and I don't know how to walk that line to know what the intentions.
The texts the commentators deal with that, and that they make a differentiation between whether the thief is coming in at night, or whether they're coming in during the day.
And I love the reason. I love the thinking behind that. Right? If they're coming during the day, their assumption is that you're not home, so they're not coming to kill you, or they wouldn't be willing to kill you. If they come at night, they know you're going to be home, so they're coming in and they're ready.
Yeah, they're gonna.
Yeah.
So, well, let's step back and talk about gun ownership. And again, we're basing our understanding on texts from 2,000 years ago, when we didn't have guns. But while I will say the American public, the American Jewish public, is largely anti-gun, right? Liberal anti-gun. That's not across the board, but largely. What is interesting is that there is plenty of textual support to own weapons, right? That it doesn't say you're not allowed to own a gun or a weapon. Okay? Where I think it becomes interesting is that there is a limitation in that we have a Talmudic text from Avodah Zarah, from the tractate Avodah Zarah, that says not everybody is allowed there you go. Not everybody can own a weapon, or for that matter, the housings for weapons. They call it the auxiliary equipment of weapons. And who are the certain people that are being referred to? Right? Well, in this case, they're referring to idolaters, which in and of themselves are not. They're no more prone to own weapons, or for that matter, do something harmful. But they were seen as, non-Jews, and therefore there was a fear that if you sold a weapon to somebody who wasn't in the community, that it might actually be used against them.
I also think that in some ways, idolaters are seen as just sort of in some ways they're like the Hamans of they're just, everyone bad is descended from Haman. Everyone bad is an idol worshiper. But I also think that, and particularly when it comes to this particular text, that the question is, who can we trust to make good decisions if we're going to sell them a weapon? An idol worshiper has already proven that they don't make good decisions because of what they worship. Right. Why would we trust them with a weapon? Right.
And so I look at it even further, that if somebody doesn't have a moral compass, would be how I would look at those who traditionally had, would be defined as idolaters. But I think that we can extrapolate from that to say that there is a reasonable desire on the part of society, in this case Talmudic society, but society in general, to limit the amount of guns or weapons, and to think about who it is that should own them and who shouldn't own them.
Do you have a sense? Quick question. Do you have a sense? Because today the reasons for wanting to own a gun are varied. For some people, it's security. For other people, it's defense. For other people, it's sporting. Do you have a sense? Because I don't. Of other than defense, was there a culture around weapons? Certainly in the Roman times, using weapons in sporting events was a regular thing, I think.
So I think that there was. Keep in mind that there wasn't large standing armies in the way that we think about them, and so people were on their own. They had to defend themselves against marauding animals, and so owning a weapon was a part of society. And what's interesting is that even though we have this piece about from Avodah Zarah that we looked at, that there's other things that certainly by the 5th century, so towards the end of the Talmudic period, that there was a clear there's clear evidence that the Jews in Babylonia were selling arms or weapons to non-Jewish authorities, and so they owned them and they sold them. So I just want to make sure that I got my point across, that I think we can find textual support to the idea that there should be what we'll call now background checks, right? That
biblical background checks. I like that. Yeah.
Not everybody gets a weapon, and there's going to be. We could talk about who gets to make that decision, but that there is a decision to be made whether you get that right or you don't get that right.
Right. And
so I just want
no, absolutely. And Do you feel like sometimes it's difficult to take rabbinic or biblical texts, which were crafted in a certain time and a certain culture, and have them feel applicable to today? In a time when, as you said before, we're talking about, when we talk about weapons in the ancient world, we're talking about swords and knives and sling shots, and we're not talking about mass murder weapons. So could one make the argument from a Jewish perspective, you think, that yeah, the Torah or the rabbis allowed certain people to have weapons, but now we're dealing with we're in a whole different realm, and that just isn't applicable anymore?
Um, the answer is yes. I think that I'm not sure that it's not at all applicable, but I think that we have to understand the limitations of the Talmudic perspective, because what is clear is that you couldn't be your own army, and spraying 100 bullets in a minute into a crowd is not self-defense. It's not there's no way that can be justified from a Jewish standpoint. And so where and you and I haven't put out our own personal feelings, because I know.
Although I think mine may be obvious. I don't know.
I was going to say that, but where I might be okay with individual gun ownership, I think that those guns would have to be limited to a small firearm versus, a sidearm versus, a full-on AR-15, Uzi,
An arsenal,
whatever it is, an arsenal. And how many do you need, before it becomes irresponsible?
Right. And so responsibility is interesting, because a lot of the texts that I was studying before we jumped on weren't about, can I own a gun, but what is my responsibility when it comes to keeping other people safe, either on my property or around me or with the things that I do. So on the one hand, actually, let me put my card to the table. My kids have never had a water pistol. I don't get it. I just don't get it. And so I would be a terrible person to debate about this with, because I can't even comprehend why anyone would want a gun. Having said that, it's easy for me to want to blame gun owners, blame gun manufacturers, to put the responsibility on the people with the weapons. But a lot of our texts say that's sort of a cop-out, because this is all of our responsibility. We have a responsibility to keep people safe. And if we're not creating laws or guidelines or restrictions to facilitate that, that's on us.
Yes, but I don't want to, I'll say, give a pass to the idea that there's plenty of textual support with the notion of responsible gun ownership. The piece out of Deuteronomy 22, I think, where one has to put up a parapet, has to put up like a fence on their roof. Keep in mind that people used to live on their roofs, and so you had to make sure that you had a fence so that somebody wouldn't get hurt, and that text right there is one that gets used in a lot of different ways about if you own something, you have to take responsibility for what harm it might do. And by the way, there's a similar text with it when it comes to your ox. So, if your ox is known to be an ox that gores people, or for that matter, if your dog is a biter, you have to keep it muzzled or you have to keep it locked up. Well, why is that any different than a gun, which has the potential to cause somebody harm?
Yeah.
Okay? So, yes, I think that's. I want to make sure we get the individual responsibility. Now, in terms of the communal responsibility, well, I think that is also. I think that there's support in Jewish tradition that we as a community need to set up situations that ensure the welfare of the wider community, and that may mean limiting what people are allowed to do and what people aren't allowed to do, right? And I think that there is plenty of evidence, current social science evidence, right, that just look at society. Right? American society, 42,000 people have died via guns in America this year. Right? Show me the map of Japan, or for that matter, any other civilized country in the world, right, where they have gun control. And not everybody is allowed. Very few people, if any, are allowed to own guns. Right? And right, the amount of death by guns is minuscule.
Or
Right?
as a sort of a contraindication to that, look at Israel, where the rates of gun ownership are high, but the rates of gun violence are low.
Yeah, I actually want to debate that because while guns are highly visible in Israel, I mean, you and I have been to Israel plenty of times. You see soldiers toting guns around. Right? What is interesting is that actually Israel has pretty strict gun ownership, right? And the idea that, first of all, Israel doesn't have a right to bear arms, right? Only certain groups of citizens are eligible to get a gun license. Among them, residents of the West Bank, and there are background checks, there are weapons training, there are demonstrations of a bona fide reason to own that gun that are all prerequisites to owning one. Okay, maintaining a license in Israel requires completing regular courses in shooting, and keep in mind these are largely, the population has gone through the army, and they have an understanding of this. They have to have regular psychological evaluations. And I read a statistic that as many as 80% of Israel's license requests are turned down annually. Right?
That's interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, I needed to, because Israel is always something that gets thrown down like it's a card that says, Israel has guns. And I think it's an okay card to throw down as long as we understand the entire picture, which is that there is education, Okay? There is an understanding of what guns are used for, okay? Self-defense, okay? And what guns are not used for, which is target practice just for the heck of it, or hunting just for the heck of it.
Yeah, I was going to say that the difference is the respect for the weapon
Yeah,
itself.
correct.
Can I want to bring in a text which I actually think is fascinating. A lot of states have open carry laws, and there's this sense that you can wear weapons as jewelry, and we actually have that in the Mishnah. There's a debate about whether you can go out on Shabbat with a sword or a bow or a shield or a club or a spear, and Rabbi Eliezer says that actually if you take a weapon out on Shabbat, you're okay because those are ornaments. And he says, well, he doesn't say this is an editorial, but they're just fashionable clothing accessories. It's unbelievable to me. And then of course he's the other rabbis say no. They are nothing other than reprehensible, and then they suggest that we're not going to have them at some point, please God, although that hasn't happened yet. So I guess the reason I wanted to bring this text in is because I don't want people to think that every Jewish, that we Jews, we're nonviolent, we're not, there are rabbis who believed that weapons are fashion. It wasn't just about security and defense, that there was something beautiful about a weapon. And I think a lot of people today feel that way also.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with that. I think that is part and parcel of the Jewish community's always, historically, the Jewish community's desire to be accepted into a wider society. And if weapons were on the sides of the rest of society, citizens, then why shouldn't Jews be able to do that?
You think that a Jewish, I don't want to say obsession because I'm not sure we have an obsession, but if there are Jews who idolize weapons in this way, you think that we learned that from other cultures? You don't think that's part of part of our tradition?
Well, I mean, I think there's plenty of historical evidence that weapons have been a part of society. It's not that Judaism is a pacifist religion, right?
Yeah.
The second story in the Bible, somebody rises up and kills their brother.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah. When people suggest that the Quran is so violent, my answer is usually, have you read the Bible lately? Got lots of violence in our Bible as well.
Right.
Let me ask you. Can I ask you one more question? I don't want to cut off any points you want to make, but
No, go ahead.
So here I am. I'm a 21st century Jew. I care about Jewish texts and Jewish traditions, and I am beside myself about how many mass shootings there are, how many gun deaths there are. What do I do? How do I look at this through a Jewish lens and approach this problem?
Well, this is going to be my lens, and the way I read Jewish tradition. I understand the need for to own a weapon, right? But as with anything that we do, we have to be responsible in how we act. Okay? And so not everybody gets a weapon. Okay? It's not, you don't have a right to bear arms. And so not everybody gets it. And if you're going to have it, you have to take care of it. Okay? And that means locking it up, That means being educated about how to use it, right? And it means thinking about what am I using it for? Right? I keep going back to the idea. Somebody wants to own a pistol because they feel a sense of lack of security, and they live in a bad neighborhood, so self-defense. I think that actually is a reasonable thing, but it goes off the rail when I own 20 of them.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's just no way that I could ever use them in the way that Judaism, I think, does put a fence around how, what's allowed and what's not allowed.
I'll just share really quickly that because we were talking about Israel before, that when I've gone to Israel, I found myself really struggling with the guns everywhere, because on the one hand, I don't like guns. I'm anti-gun, whatever you want to say. On the other hand, I love Israel, and I want to support Israel. And I've had the opportunity to have a couple conversations with some of the soldiers, and what they've consistently said to me is that we don't like this. We don't want to have to carry guns around. This is something we have to do. It's not something we would ever choose to do. And to me, that is at least worth looking at.
Yes. I'll add two things to that. First of all, I'll go back to the notion of the neighborhood. Right? The neighborhood that Israel lives in, right, is not an easy neighborhood. Right? There is something to self-defense in that part of the town, that part of the world. Right? The other thing is the idea that Israel has the army teaches this. Right? Yeah. It is part of the curriculum. It is called Tohar HaNeshek, purity of arms. Right? And people are literally taught, right, when it's allowed and when it's not allowed to use to use your gun. And that's why I think it is why I think Israel is a reasonable example of reasonable gun ownership, because they limit it, and those who have them understand why they're using them or why they have them and how to use them responsibly.
And so a lesson for us is respect for the weapon, understanding the weapon, having some sense of purity around our interactions with these weapons.
Right.
Yeah. No easy answers to this.
No, but I think that we should end with the Isaiah text about they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. That ultimately, if this is the final parting shot, that we want to get to a point where we don't need those weapons, and we're able to do things constructively and peacefully.
Amen. Amen, amen, amen. Absolutely. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we will, I don't know if we're coming back in 2 weeks. Are we taking winter break off? I don't even know. We didn't really discuss it.
No, we haven't discussed it. Okay.
I'll be here. If anyone wants to show up, I'll be here.
Very good.
All right, Rabbi, have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks, everyone, for watching. See you later.
Bye, everyone.